Excellent. Well, thanks everybody for coming to Pequot Library's Meet the Author event. I'm going to let Jane Dean do the hard work here. And if you could all just remember to please keep yourselves muted while the program is in process, and then we will unmute for Q&As towards the end. But here's Jane. Jane, thank you so much.
Well, I'm delighted to be here. I've been a member of the Meet the Author Committee since its inception, which I think is well over 24 years. And we've had terrific authors from, I'm not sure, I couldn't remember if we had any foreign authors, but an awful lot of interesting authors from around the country, mostly the East Coast because they all volunteer. And I'm very excited about this program because I have known this author, Christopher, whom I call Treef, for, I don't know, over 20 years, because he and I served on the library board together, and he was a wonderful board member, a wonderful, wonderful president. He's been a great father. He's a great sailor. And my gosh, no one in the world knew he was also a very accomplished author. I am amazed at how he with his character, Ben Porter, sucked me into reading these books, because typically I do not read mysteries, I do not read thrillers, I do not read things about spies and the FBI. None of this I would do except for my friend Treef. So I read it, I started to read, I got very excited. I didn't put the first book down for a few days until it was done. I'm a slow reader. And then I started asking around the community of his good friends and people who knew him well, people who worked with him, one person who really, I think, had been his mentor in many ways. And I said, did you know Christopher Rosow was an author, that he wrote? No, I didn't ask his family. But he tells me even his family didn't know he was writing these books. Well, he's a very gifted, amazing, obviously very knowledgeable person. If you haven't started to read yet, you will see that you're learning about many things you didn't even know about. And how does he know this much? Anyway, I'm so pleased he's here, and it's exciting because it's a very local program, even though many of you people might be from far away, because we not only have the local Christopher Rosow born here, but we have Sissy Biggers, who has lived here her whole life. And you probably know Sissy because you've probably seen her on TV. She's been on TV a lot. She's been on the Today Show. She's an expert on lifestyle. She talks about many things she's done to do with our homes and the way we live. And she's very compelling. And I like her best because Pequot Library is my second home, because she has done an incredible job as a volunteer for Pequot Library through the years. And her husband was our board chair, and she's just given so much to us as a library. And because we are a private library, it's very important that everyone works. So Sissy, I guess you start, or do I start with
I think I'm ready to take over, Jane,
okay,
if that's all right. And I'm going to jump off of that nice context that you've given us about the Pequot Library, and how really sort of apt and perfect it is on the last day of the fiscal year, June the 30th. Christopher Rosow and I are both longtime members of the library and, of course, great supporters. So for all of you who have not had a chance to be a part of this year's annual fund, today is your last day. So I think our little plan worked. We'd be here on the last day of giving. So thank you for that. And hello, Treef, great to see you.
Great to see
in
you
South
too, Sissy.
Nice to see you. As Jane, I'll echo what Jane said. Nobody knew that secretly, nor did his family, he was writing a book. And this spring, one of the books that I enjoyed very much was Stephen King on writing. And one of the great things, he's very famous for his quotes on writing. And the one I think we can all sort of identify with, no matter what part of the writing process we might be in, no matter whether it's in our head or it's literally on paper. He said, the scariest moment is always before you start. So Christopher, if you could tell us a little bit about how you started and just made that commitment, and then in the end produced 2 books. That's pretty amazing for a first-time author.
Well, to start, we really have to rewind the clock all the way back to, 20 years ago with Pequot Library and how much I enjoyed the relationship that I had with Pequot Library. And I mean, really, it's an honor. I'm so grateful to do this, to have the opportunity to do this with such an amazing institution that's really good. It's going to outlast all of us and be successful. So what a cool opportunity. And so sort of getting into the whole writing thing was as accidental but as intentional getting into Pequot Library. You find something you like, you find something that is captivating to you, and all of a sudden, the taps open up and you see what's out there. So this was all a very, very accidental journey, which comes as a surprise to many people. They think, well, how'd you plot this out? Was this some sort of grand plan to write these 2 books? And no, and none of that was the case. It was all very much dictated by circumstance and by just coincidence, and I got into it. So interrupt me when you feel like I've talked too much.
I just, but I was just curious. It's just about really that moment when you said your kids didn't even know, where you just shut the door and said to your wife, I'm going to start writing now. And did it take a little bit of time for them to realize, well, actually, this is pretty serious. We can all, indulge our spouses. Okay, honey, how's the book coming? But you really did it. And what was that transition to, I'm going to try this, to, wow, I'm really doing this?
So the transition was again, very gradual, very circumstantial. So I started writing in the fall of 2017. So I participated in a sailboat race called the Marblehead to Halifax race, which is what the first book opens up with, on a boat called Flying Lady, which is owned by a Pequot Yacht Club member named Dr. Phil Dickey. Dr. Dickey invited me to go on the race as a crew. My son Connor came along. It was our first Marblehead Halifax race. In the middle of the race, which was a milk run, it was actually kind of boring because the conditions were perfect. This idea struck me of how you could use the offshore sailing scene to do something illicit. So time passed till October. I was running my design and construction business full time, really, really busy. One night in October, I was sitting at my desk at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. The crew had already gone home for the day. And I looked at a pile of bills and change orders and drawings I needed to catch up on. And I just said, I need a break from this. And I started writing down my idea. So it was very much, just out of the blue one day, just sat down and wrote what became part of the middle of the beginning of False Assurances. It wasn't called that then. I didn't have a plot. I just started writing this scene that I thought would be kind of fun to do. And then it progressed. I mean, it progressed for years. I actually stopped writing maybe, I don't know, November of 2017. And this is after, of course, Googling, because of course, everything you learn on the internet is real. I Googled, how long is a typical novel? And Google told me it's between 80 and 100,000 words. I had written maybe 15,000 words. So I was like, well, it's a long way to go. And I have a business to run, so I'll come back to this. And that's how it all started. And then I picked it up a couple of years later.
Well, it's interesting that you started in the middle of the first book, False Assurances, because it opens with such a distinct and first person narration by the protagonist, which is Ben Porter. And I would love for you to read that description of Ben Porter, because you can't help it when you know an author and you dig into their book and you're like, oh, so Treef's written a book, and you start reading a first person description of the character, and he describes himself, and I was like, wow, is this Treef's view of himself, Or is this the character that is so very, very carefully described in all of his quirkiness?
Right. So that was really what I started to do when I came up with the idea, and then I wanted to come up with the character to go with it. And the character I came up with was this character, Ben Porter. So let me just read that beginning couple of pages, paragraphs. This is chapter 1 of False Assurances, and this is not a plot spoiler. So for anyone who hasn't read the book, we're not giving anything away because you can see this. Chapter 1. My name is Ben Porter. I'm 27 years old, and I work for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Cool, huh? I guess you're thinking, yep, I know the type. G-man, clean shaven with a crew cut, a trim, athletic build, a sharp navy blue suit, a pressed white shirt, striped tie, aviator sunglasses, a Fed. Yeah, no, not exactly. So that was my Ben Porter character, who's the antithesis of the secret agent that you'd find in this type of book, which is what I thought would be really fun. Can I write the anti-hero almost? Can I write somebody new and write, not the super spy, not the guy with the chiseled abs, the six-pack, who's the marksman, who's dashingly handsome and drives fast and does all those cool things that the typical call it James Bond does. And in fact, in the second book, I kind of made fun of that. And if you would indulge me, and again, not a plot spoiler here, but I wrote about Ben. This is Ben doing his introduction in the second book. He confesses, he writes, or he says, he narrates, and I confess, despite the workouts, I'm still no super spy with chiseled abs. I don't rock a six-pack at my waist, though I am skilled at carrying one in a paper bag in preparation for doing some 12-ounce curls. So, Ben is not that guy. And I actually wrote, he's not a super spy. So that was so fun to write a character who was not going to be that James Bond person.
Yeah, and he loves a good meal. He likes it when the food comes in. He perks right up, and he appreciates a good culinary choice.
And a great cup of coffee, by the way. He drinks a lot of coffee.
And the beginning where he's this unassuming back office guy who's suddenly thrust into what could be a national terrorist attack, something very serious. In the midst of all this, there's a lot of technical setup. And you mentioned the milk run, that great race you had to Gloucester, Mass., Halifax to Gloucester. The beginning of the book really takes us aboard the flying, what is the name of the boat again?
The Flying Lady.
The Flying Lady. We're really aboard the Flying Lady when things take a turn. And there's a lot of navigational aspects, and then we move into some technical weaponry. How about that research? Where did you really get your grit and your chops around that? Because it's impressive. I thought you really knew what you're talking about. Maybe you made it all up.
No, I did a ton of research. I mean, that's the beauty of the internet, right? You can type in a few words and you can learn a vast amount. And then really the trick is then double checking it. You don't take your first source as the only source. 3-4 referrals, and then you see, yes, okay, this is coming up in multiple places. But what I was trying to do was to have a thriller that had a sense of humor, but also was accurate, and also got into the weeds a little bit on some of these technical things, because I think that there was a hole as I could tell, for that. And I've got a lot of great authors that I love to read. Tom Clancy, of course, being sort of the pioneer in the techno thriller space, but his books are dense and there's lots of names and titles, and it's hard to get through them. And then there's, on the other end of the spectrum, perhaps Nelson DeMille and his characters, and he's got a very witty character named John Corey that he writes. So I was trying to do this sort of amalgamation of these things and write a thriller that was fun to read and that was detailed enough that it really caught your interest, but didn't drag you so far down that you, like in Tom Clancy's case, you felt like you were on the submarine, but you didn't need to know how to drive the submarine.
Well, you really are setting me up for my next question, which is, you've been described by the critics as, rather than a first-time author, a well-seasoned thrill writer, and to the point where you were recognized and had a wonderful book blurb, as it were, by none other than James Patterson. You've been recognized by Rush Limbaugh, as has introduced your book to his listeners. Thus, you have, with a bullet, shot up the Amazon list and other lists. And tell me about that part of the process. I mean, how much did you really have to get the book into the hands of these influencers, or really position yourself with them to get that recognition?
Well, for that, I obviously am very, very fortunate to have parents who trust, who believe in me and who support me. And so my father, who many who I'm sure are watching, David Rosow, and my mom, Jeannie Rosow. My father they're both very personal people, and they both live part-time in Palm Beach, Florida, where they got to know, thanks to my father being on the Palm Beach Town Council, got to know a lot of the residents in that neighborhood, one of which was James Patterson. So when I wrote the story of the background of the book was after, in 2019, I sort of scaled back my design and construction business, and I had the time, which I was so desperately looking for, to kind of do other things other than work 24/7. I had the time to write the book. I wrote it sort of as a side journey still back then, and I sent the first manuscript to my father electronically. He read it and he said, "Wow, this is really fun." We had some comments back and forth. And he said, "Can I show it to a couple of people?" And I said, "Sure." At this point, I'm like, this isn't going to go anywhere. I need to put bread on the table. It's fun, and it's fun to get the story out and know that I wrote it, but it's not going anywhere. So, true to form, my father shows it to a bunch of people, one of which was an author named Ted Bell. Ted Bell recommended his professional editor to me, who doesn't normally work with first-time writers. That editor said, "This is good, needs a lot of work. I can help you with that." I said, "Fantastic," because I have no idea what I'm doing. And then I got a call sometime, and I think it was April of 2019, from a Florida number, and it was James Patterson. And he said, "This is really good. The middle part is goofy. This needs to be worked on. This doesn't work." I mean, he gave me great feedback. I talked to him for a long time, and I'm still super grateful and deeply bowled over by the time he took to do this. But he said, "It's good. So let's do something with it." And that started a process of writing and rewriting and rewriting. Then I took it seriously because, that's when it was like, this has got some attention. And James Patterson said it's good.
But you did not get the attention of the publishers. That sounded pretty typical first author.
Yeah. So as the trajectory goes, so you look at it as like a parabolic curve. So as I write the thing and I get it to the point where I think that it's good enough, and James Patterson likes it, he's seen the rewrite. I've had this professional editor help me with it. And then James Patterson's representative says, "Hey, we could take this to New York and propose it." And so, this is June of 2019, and I'm like up here, top of the world. This is fantastic. This came out of the blue. What a cool adventure this is. I'm like walking on clouds. And so the proposal sent out to all the big New York publishers, and over the course of that last summer, the rejection notes trickled in, "No, thank you, no, thank you, no, thank you." So going from up here to dropping all the way down as the last note came in, you pick yourself off the pavement and say, "Okay, that was fun while it lasted, but it's dead in the water. It's not going anywhere." So it was a curve of from being thrilled to being utterly dejected and depressed. Like, wow, I really thought this had some legs, and it did, but I didn't give up.
Well, you went the self-publishing route. And what's that process like?
So that was a bit of a reckoning, to be honest. My representative, who also works with James Patterson, said, "Listen, you could take this to a smaller publisher. You'll just give the rights away. You'll give the character away. You might as well just try self-publishing. We call it independent publishing. It sort of sounds better. There's a lot of work being done on independent publishing, and it's a feasible way to get to market." So the plan was, if there was a plan, which there really was not. That's when I actually told my kids, was when, I had gotten rejected. I said, "This is what we're going to do. I'm going to rewrite the book, and I'm going to self-publish it. And by the way, while I'm at it, I'm going to write a sequel because this is a foolproof scheme. If I write a sequel, then I've got sort of twice the legitimacy in the market, and somebody can read the first book and then they might want to continue to read the second book. So that was the entire plan at that point, was all right, just rewrite it and write a sequel and then independently publish it. It was a lot harder than that. It took way longer than I thought it would take. There was so much that went into the independent publishing part of it that I had no idea existed, but I found some people to help me with it, and it turned out to obviously get the product done. Not very well, and we can talk about typos because that's been one of the big bugaboos in the whole process, which is a funny story actually, but it was a process to get the thing to market as an independent published work.
Well, the book has been described by Jane, as Jane was saying, you can't put it down. It seems to be the phrase everyone is using when they describe their experience with your books. You can't put it down. You can't put it down. And there's nothing that's just more encouraging than that as an author. So now I'm going to turn it over to our chat room. And we've got Jen Pratt there that's going to help navigate any questions you might have for Christopher. Please jump in and share your thoughts about the book or any questions you might have.
Hi everyone, I just wanted to say if you want to ask a question, you can either raise your hand using the little arrow down next to your participant, the 3 dots next to your name. You should be able to raise your hand, or you can just type your question in the chat and I can help call on you that way.
And then Jane, if you had another question from your very nice introduction.
Oh, sorry, Jane, you're still muted. Just hold on 1 second. There you go.
I just wondered, were you a computer scientist as an undergraduate, Tree, or?
No, I was a history major. So that actually taught me how to write to some degree.
Yes, of course.
Not creative writing, but not computer science. I've just had, from my construction and design business, I was pretty well versed in computers. I've been using them all my life. So it's the technical side comes reasonably easy for me. I still need help from my offspring when, there's an issue with, well, I can't figure out Zoom. How do I do this? So I know what I can do and I know what I can't do as well.
Because so much of, especially, threat bias. I have a trouble with remembering your titles, I have to say. They don't roll off my tongue when I talk about them, but particularly that was just overwhelming and I couldn't believe I kept reading it. But I was so into the characters that I had to keep reading it.
Well, that's the trick. I mean, to try to pull technical and humor and some sort of compelling storyline together. I mean, it's really fun to do. So I love that. I love that feedback that, even if you're not versed in technology, you still enjoy the story.
So we have Cheryl Carlissimo has a question for you.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I wasn't sure if I'd unmuted. So thanks very much for what you've told us so far. I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about how the self-publishing route went, how difficult it was and how that worked for you.
It's difficult, but it's not difficult. So where I found a firm out in Arizona that helps with the hand-holding to actually get the product built. And so one of the big surprises to me was I sort of assumed wrongfully that as a self-published independent author, most of my sales, if not the vast majority of my sales, would be on an ebook format, on mostly on Kindle. And boy, was I wrong about that, because the first thing that this firm told me to do was first design a good cover, which they helped me with, but then lay out a print book, because the print book layout is what will drive the whole process forward. And then from print book layout, then you format ebook, and then you format Apple ebook, and then you get it into distribution for print on demand, which is the way it works. So they helped with the formatting and the files and all that, which I could not have. I mean, I could probably have figured it out on my own. It would have taken twice as long, and it just wouldn't have been as good. But it was helpful to have that hand holding. But once that process is done, it's literally upload the books to Amazon and to my distributor, which is a company called Ingram Content, Ingram Spark. And then they're out there, and you can buy them from Amazon, buy them from Apple, buy them from your local bookseller. The local bookstores can order them. I did not go with an exclusive Amazon deal just because I didn't think that was fair. I wanted the reach, but the independent publishing process is really, there's a lot of steps from the Word document, because I wrote in Microsoft Word, to the published version of the file, which is some file format that I couldn't even, there's several of them. But it still stays basically the same. So it's a complicated process. I definitely had some help, but there's a lot of research to be done on the internet to find out the steps to get there.
Okay. And did you, after that step, did you then craft a typical publishing deal with the publisher?
No, because I am the publisher. So I created an LLC just to be my publisher, and that publisher is me. And because I'm a publisher, I can then go get the ISBN numbers and send the books to the Library of Congress for filing and, for recording in perpetuity, and get them in distribution. So as a self-published author, I mean, really, I am the publisher as well as the publicist, as well as, all the other jacks of the trade.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have a question from Virginia Cargill. Virginia, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
I think that's a no. I think that's a
okay.
no.
Then I don't mind asking it.
She is. There she
How are
is.
you?
Here we go.
Congratulations. This is very exciting. I just wanted to know what's next. Are you going to keep with the same character? Are you going to start some new characters? So that's one question. The other question was, what was your biggest challenge while you were doing this?
Well, the first question is the easy question of what's next, and so I left a thread open at the conclusion of the second book to carry it forward, to see, what could, if I wanted to keep writing on this, and if it had some sort of success and appeal, because of course you have no idea when you click the button to make them available, you have no idea what's going to happen to them. And fortunately, the good news is that people seem to be enjoying them, and the sales have been fantastic. So I will write, I hope, a sequel. I know where it's going to go. I have it kind of plotted out in my head. I don't know exactly where it will go. And a funny story about the second book is I started writing the second book without knowing how it would end, because I figured it would come to me as I wrote it. And that was a very, I kind of knew where I wanted it to go, but I didn't know exactly. And so let the story go, let the characters tell the story. I know that sounds sort of strange because I'm making the characters up as I go, but they in my mind, they get their own personalities, they get their own ways of speaking and their agendas, and it's fun to sort of play that puppet master, but also have them lead the story as well. So yes, there should be a sequel or two or three, or who knows, we'll see how long it'll go, but Ben Porter for certain will come back. So from the challenges perspective, I mean, man, how many hours are in the day? I mean, we could be here for way longer than our allotted time. I think that the two challenges that really struck me was actually not the writing so much, was the editing. And to go back and to have the courage to cut what you've written is really, really hard. And in fact, I would guess that when James Patterson said after reading the first manuscript, this part is goofy, and that really rings in my mind still today. Part of it I left in even when the book was proposed in New York, and then when I rewrote it, I literally killed off that plot line, because he was right. It was goofy, and it was only through my ego and my sort of love of the words that I had written that I kept it in, and that was a mistake. So learning to cut and to really look at your own words with a really critical eye is difficult, and to go back and do it again and again, because at some point you're so familiar with the things you've written, it's difficult to sort of see the forest for the trees. And I mentioned typos earlier. I mean, the funny thing about, and one of the great things too at the same time is learning how many typos there are in both books and corrections that needed to be made. And the cool thing was, and this I had no idea would happen, and I am really grateful for it. The great thing is that people would reach out to me on social media through Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, whatever, and say, hey, I found a typo on page whatever, and they'd let me know. And, you know, there's some reviews on Amazon or Apple Books saying this is terrible, there are too many typos. There were 32, as far as I can tell, in the first book and 24 in the second book. And the beauty of being independent publishing is that I can upload a new version and correct it. But the cool thing was is that readers told me that in such a kind way. I have a reader in Texas who sent me a one-page Word document with, you know, here's what you need to fix. I mean, who takes the time to do that? That generosity of spirit was really an eye-opener and was so rewarding to see as the whole thing came together.
That's amazing. And it also, you know, that whole, suddenly you have these virtual relationships. How's that adjustment been for you, where you're, you know, you can read the reviews on Amazon and you're getting these Twitters and people are weighing in. What's that aspect of your life like now?
It's a bit surreal, to be honest. I mean, you of all people, Sissy, you might know this because you've been in the public eye before, but social media is a very strange animal. And I'm not completely comfortable with it still. I've created an Instagram account, a Twitter account, a Facebook account. I still don't know how to use them very effectively. I'm still learning, but the relationships that you do form over these platforms is fascinating because you now have the ability to connect directly with somebody and have a private conversation, if you will. And some of the folks that I've connected with, literally from all over the world, have been, you know, it's been great to see that kind of response and a lot of, you know, hey, this is fantastic, love this, can't wait for book 3. You know, that sort of encouragement is really, it's very personal and it's really rewarding. I'm grateful, barely begins to cover it.
Wow.
Sorry, I was muted. Next, we have a question from Caroline Crawford. Caroline, do you want to unmute? I don't know if she can hear, but her question is, film rights, fingers crossed, who do you have in mind to play Ben Porter?
Good question.
That's a great question, and something to work on for sure. I don't know is the short answer. Ben Porter, in my mind, is an unknown. He's going to be, you know, somebody we've never seen on the big screen before. I don't think that Ben Porter could be an A-list actor. I think that the supporting cast, you know, dare I be so lucky to see this make the jump from page to screen. The supporting cast could be A-listers. I'm quite certain they'd all want to be, right? But Ben Porter would be an unknown. I think Ben Porter could be anybody. And in fact, it's a great question that when I wrote the first manuscript, I was very sort of sparse with my character descriptions because I wanted the reader to use their imagination. And so my editor said, no, you can't do that. People want to be told what they look like, what this character is, you know, lead them along. And I said, you know, all right. So I took the advice, and to the most part, my characters are reasonably well described, except for Ben Porter. Ben Porter has 2 descriptions. And this is, again, no giveaway. He's maybe a little bit overweight and a little bit stocky, and he once wore glasses but had LASIK done. And that's it. You don't really know how tall he is. You don't know what color skin he has. You don't know what color eyes he has, what his hair looks. You have no idea. And that's very, very much intentional because I want the reader to imagine Ben Porter in their own mind. And if there are, you know, if X number of copies have been sold, there are X number of versions of Ben Porter. I think that's really cool. So the downside of that is when the movie comes out, you know, everybody but one person will probably be disappointed by the choice in Ben Porter, but that's okay. We'll deal with that then.
Next we have Vicky Kanopka. Vicky, are you still here? Do you want to unmute?
I am here. I have not read the books yet, but I'm wondering if you have a favorite scene from either book. Was it the first scene that you wrote, or is it something that came up later as you got into them more?
Oh, it's a great question. And it's like, you know, picking a favorite child, right? It's almost impossible. No, I don't really have a favorite scene. I think that, and I think it was, again, James Patterson who wrote this, you know, every chapter should read like your first chapter. And you should draw the reader in every single scene, every single time. So I'm sure there are scenes that could be better, but there are scenes that I think are are interesting in their own rights. I've gotten some criticisms on some of the scenes where people, including my family, have said, how could you possibly write this? Which is interesting to me. But it is fiction, and it's all part of a storyline. So no, I don't say I have a favorite scene. I obviously have a favorite character, and that's Ben Porter, because he's just fun to write, and because you haven't read the books, so it's sort of a combination of Ben narrating in first person and then a third person narrator as well, and the two go back and forth. But Ben is really fun to write, and he's definitely there's a little bit of me certainly in that character.
And then from Celeste, we have, what does the book tell me about how you relate to others? And Celeste, if you have anything to add to that, please jump in.
Well, that's a pretty deep question. I'm not sure where to go with that. I think that the way I tried to write the book was to be fair to all the characters, and to be, where you could be kind, to be kind, and also to give Ben Porter, who's definitely the underdog, a voice. And I think that that's important. I think that we often let the people who speak loudest, or the people who speak most forcibly, or who have the biggest personalities, they get the podium, and that silences the rest of the room, often negatively. So I think what I'd like to, if there's a takeaway from it, is to let the Ben Porters of the world have their moment to shine, and to not dismiss them because they don't look the part, or because they're too quiet, or because they're just not, on that level. So I hopefully that's an equalizer more than anything.
Great. Do we have any other questions before? I think I actually have a question, just piggybacking off of what something that you said in response to Vicky's question, is like, you can't have a story without conflict, right? And sometimes stories have some really intense conflict, and as you alluded to, some writing about some very unpleasant things. What is that like for you as an author, to kind of have to and from everything that Jane has said, we haven't met a good person, to have to dig into that part of your imagination and pull that out?
That's a great question, and to figure out, motive of the bad things that happen in this world, because bad things do happen, and there are bad people. So how do you write where you hope you're a good person? How do you write somebody who is not a good person, who's evil, who's just inherently a dark person? How do you write that? And you sort of dig, and you try to find the words. It's very, very difficult for me. But I think the best advice that I got was reading an interview by Gillian Flynn, who wrote the book called Gone Girl, which is a phenomenal book, really adventurous, having two narrators, the unreliable narrator, that sort of thing. But an interview that I read with her said that she would write first and blush later. And you can take that in any number of ways, but if you write and then you edit and you go back, then you can look at it dispassionately, and you can find that motivation.
Sure. That's great.
I like that. And and speaking of potentially blushing, I noticed in your book, the first book, that there's no dedication, Christopher.
There is no dedication, because that wasn't on the template that I used when I formatted the book. There's an acknowledgement at the end, but there's no dedication at the beginning, nor is there one in the second book either. I don't know.
This is your chance.
I have no idea.
This is your chance to dedicate the book.
Right? Yeah. No, I forgot. Basically, I didn't think about it. And it's funny when you're writing something that you don't know where it's going to go. Doesn't that seem a little pretentious to dedicate something to? Yes. I don't know. It didn't cross the screen, and it didn't happen. It's a good question, though. I'm amazed that somebody noticed.
That's interesting. So, Jen, are we ready to wrap at this point?
If we have time, there's one more question. Okay, Dave C., do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Sure. Hey, Treef. It's Dave Curtis.
Hey, Dave.
So I was just curious about the choice to write the book in first person from Ben's perspective. That just seemed like an interesting choice.
It's a great question. So a little bit of backstory on that. The first draft of the first book actually had 2 first-person narrators and 1 third-person narrator. So I was writing in 2 actually completely distinct voices plus the narrator's voice. And when the editors looked at it, he said, you know, you can't do this. Actually referred to, coincidentally, Gillian Flynn. He's like, you're not Gillian Flynn. You can't get away with this. Nobody knows who you are. So write in only the first person and then have that third person narrator. But Ben Porter, in my mind, was always in first person just because it's fun to riff on that kind of inner monologue and, you know, the nonsense at sometimes and the good work that Ben does at other times. It's fun to write that as if it's happening sort of stream of consciousness. So that was not a stylistic decision. That was purely for me because it was fun to write.
Very cool.
I've loved all these questions. And I think that all of us have that, maybe that little bit of envy that you've been able to accomplish, not only 1, but 2 books behind closed door with your family revolving around you, and to have 2 years, almost 3 years later, to have such acknowledgement of your work. So for those of you who have not picked up the False Assurances and Threat Bias, they're easy to come by on Amazon. And I think we'll all remember, you know, when we knew Treef when, and that we really look forward to seeing the next steps in your writing career. And we wish you very much success, and we look forward to seeing you around the Pequot Library.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me today. It's been an honor for me, and it's been a real pleasure. So thank you very much.
And thank you to Jane and to Jen as well, and everyone at Pequot Library.